everybody, welcome to Wire Digitally with me Shravani. As we have gone through introduction of communication and effective communication skills in the last session, to become more employable, we should also learn organizational communication. Organizational communication is very important if you have to deal your top management, subordinates, your colleagues and peers, etc. So, for that, we have to learn classification of communication. Let us start today's session on classification of communication. Our agenda for today's session would be characteristics of communication, communication based on type of audience, communication based on medium of communication, communication based on number of persons involved in the communication. Well, let us see introduction of organizational communication first. When communication is referred to in an organizational context, it is known as organizational communication. According to William Scott, it is a process which involves the transmission and accurate replication of ideas ensured by feedback for the purpose of eliciting actions which will accomplish organizational goals. Well, organizational communication is the sum of all the things one person does when he wants to create understanding in the mind of another. It involves a systematic and continuous process of telling, listening, and understanding. Also, it is a way of reaching others with facts, ideas, thoughts, and values. Communication is the process by which information is transmitted between individuals and or organizations so that an understanding and response develops. First, we have to know the characteristics of communication to get into the depth of classification of communication. So let us see what are characteristics of communication. Communication involves at least two persons, the sender and the receiver. It involves the transfer of ideas, facts, emotions, gestures, symbols, and action from sender to receiver. Understanding is an essential component of communication. That is, the ideas, opinions, emotions, and so on conveyed should be accurately replicated and in the receiver's mind. So always whatever the gestures you're giving or the ideas, the facts given by the sender, it should always be understood by the receiver. It should be accurately replicated in the receiver's mind. Next, communication may be intentional or unintentional. The purpose of communication is to elicit action, inform, or to express a certain point of view. Communication is a two-way process, that is, feedback from the receiver to the sender is an essential component of communication. Communication is a dynamic process, that is, it grows and develops. Communication is systematic, that is, every component of the process is affected by every other component. For example, if there is a fault in the telephone, like channel of communication, it will affect the message received by the receiver. So these are the characteristics of communication which are really important, which you have to focus on. So let's see what is classification of communication. Classification is based on channels of communication. The channel of communication refers to the path through which the information is transmitted. Communication is generally classified on the basis of type of audience, medium of communication, number of persons involved in the communication. As we discussed earlier, you can communicate in different ways. That may vary depending upon the need, the suitability, and the purpose of communication. First, let's see communication based on types of audience. So, communication based on types of audience is of two types. If you observe the screen, you can see internal communication and external communication. Internal communication. What is internal communication? It is an interaction between members of the same organization. It could be both formal and informal. So under internal communication, we have formal communication and informal communication. So what comes under formal communication? Let's learn that. First type of communication which comes under formal communication is vertical communication. What is vertical communication? In vertical communication, information is transmitted from top management to the employees working in the organization or vice versa. We have upward and downward flow of messages in this vertical communication. A boss giving instructions to a subordinate is an example of downward communication, and a report or feedback given by a subordinate to a senior or top manager is an example of upward communication. So the next type of communication under formal communication is horizontal communication. This is also called as lateral communication. It is an interaction among peers or colleagues of similar hierarchy. This can be the most effective form of communication, leading to fruitful progression at the organizational level. And the third type of communication under formal communication would be diagonal communication. In this diagonal communication, hierarchical bindings are done away with and communication flows irrespective of positions or status. So it is not bound to follow any set path for information, and it can flow freely in any direction. This open communication helps in building relationships between seniors and subordinates. With this, we are done with internal communication, and let's see what is external communication. Well, external communication with people is nothing but the communication with people outside the organization is called as external communication. The stakes are higher in external communication as this reflects the image of the organization. Two examples of external communication are advertising, media interactions, meetings with clients, etc. Well, let us see. We also missed out on internal communication. One of the types of internal communication is informal communication. So informal communication, under informal communication we have grapevine. Grapevine is an informal communication network which spreads rumors and gossips at all levels of the organization. This form of communication runs along with formal communication and is neither pre-planned nor deliberated. Well guys, let's see next method. Communication based on medium of communication. Well, in this we have two types of communication, verbal communication and non-verbal communication. So, what is verbal communication? The sharing of information between individuals by using words is called verbal communication. It may be further categorized into spoken and written communication. So, what is spoken communication? Spoken communication refers to talking to oneself, dialogue, discussion between two people, and telephone calls, etc. Whereas written communication refers to memos, letter reports, emails, and other written forms of communication. Guys, emails is one of the important topics in written communication, which you can learn in our upcoming videos. So, let's get back to non-verbal communication. What is non-verbal communication? Non-verbal communication is the process of communication through sending and receiving wordless cues between people. In simple words, non-verbal communication is the process of transmitting messages without spoken words and is done through facial expressions, gestures, gaze, posture, space, clothing, hairstyle, shoes, symbols, voice quality, emotion, speaking style, color, smell, etc. It is very important to understand that our message is interpreted both by words we use and the way we deliver our words. So 7% of the whole communication process will always be verbal. 38% of communication will always be tone of voice, and 55% of our communication is all about body language, that is non-verbal communication. So this is one of the important topics. Non-verbal communication is really important, which you have to learn and work hard on it. Next, let's see communication based on number of persons involved. So under based on number of persons involved, we have four types: intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication, group communication, and public communication. Well, so let's see what is intrapersonal communication. Communication that happens within oneself is called intrapersonal communication. It plays a critical role in self-reflection and understanding of how others see us. And what is interpersonal communication? A communication that occurs between two people is called interpersonal communication. Now, what is group communication? Communication that occurs among more than two people, generally in a small group, is called group communication. Next, public communication. Communication intended to help an organization reach out to the public to fulfill external communication goals is called public communication. And once we are done with classification of communication, I would like to give you a few tips on how you can improve your communication skills. In the last session or last video, I have given few tips which are really helpful to improve your communication skills. So please go back to that video as well and look out for more effective tips. And when we have to talk about today's tips, the first tip which I'm going to give you for today's session would be think before you speak. It is always important to think before you start speaking. A best example I can give you is if your mother tongue is Hindi, you think in Hindi and speak out in English. Or if your mother tongue is Telugu, you think in Telugu and speak out in English. So you think in one language and you speak out in another language. That affects the process of your communication or speech of your communication. So it is always important for you to think in one language and speak in the same language. Think in the same language and speak in the same language. This is really important for you. Watch out for distractions. This is the next step I'm going to give you for today's session. Watch out for distractions. When you are speaking in public, you may see many distractions around you. Like few of the audiences may be very interested in what you're speaking. Few of them are not interested in what you're speaking. So whoever is not interested in what you're speaking, they act as a distraction for you. Or if you are in a meeting, one of your clients is not listening to you. How can you find the person is not listening to you or not interested in you? It is simple, guys. If a person is actually listening to you while you're speaking, will always sit straight, will have good eye contact with you. So if one of the person who is not interested will not give you good eye contact or may not sit straight, may relax back. So these are the signs you can know what actually the distractions are, and you always should watch out for these distractions and should overcome these distractions. And the last tip which I'm going to give you today is be brief but to the point. While you're giving any speech or while you're writing any email or while you are going through any type of communication with any person, it can be any other person, you always have to explain what is needed. You should always brief out on to the point. Don't give any additional information. Say for example, you are going to attend an interview and then you are going to have a final round with HR. Then whatever questions your HR asks you, he may ask you a simple question and you end up giving 10 minutes or 5 minutes of explanation. The other person will lose interest in what you're speaking, right? So, or you're having a client meeting and then whatever client asks you, you give lots and lots of information which is not need of the hour. The other person may lose interest in you. So you always have to be brief but to the point. Well, guys, this brings to the end of our session today. I hope you enjoyed and learned the classification of communication, and I hope you will really follow the tips of the day. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching our videos. Many more videos are going to come in your way. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.